On behalf of everyone at the Saskatchewan SPCA, welcome you to the Pride in Animal Welfare webinar. My name is Josh Houry, and I'm the Community Relations Coordinator, and I'll also be your host for the evening. I would like to start by acknowledging that the land where I am tonight is Treaty Land, known as Treaty 4 territory, the original land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis. I pay my respects to the ancestors of this land that we now call Saskatchewan. Tonight, we will hear from two speakers. Dr. Rebecca Mycock will share her story as an out member of the 2S LGBTQ plus community working in veterinary medicine. And Andrew Hartman will provide an introduction and foundation to sex, gender, and sexuality, including the spectrum of 2S LGBTQ plus identities. All right, now I would like to introduce you to our speakers. Dr. Rebecca Mycock is a small animal veterinarian working in the City Park community in Saskatoon. After graduating from veterinary school in 2018, she did a one-year rotating internship in Hollywood, Florida. During this time, she found the courage to come out publicly and to truly embrace her sexuality. She returned to Canada to work as an emergency veterinarian at the VMC, which I believe is Veterinary Medical Center. Was that correct,
yes,
Rebecca?
That's correct, yeah.
Before settling in at City Park Vet, she strives to create an inclusive environment for her coworkers and clients, and visibility as part of the 2S LGBTQ plus community is extremely important to her. Joining Rebecca this evening is Andrew Hartman. Andrew is a proud queer Métis, differently abled program evaluator, applied social psychology doctoral student, and founder of System, a social enterprise focused on the facilitating positive change in the world through research and service delivery. Andrew's research focuses on the psychological process of healing in queer survivors of gender-based violence. They have over 5 years of experience conducting community-based research alongside the 2S LGBTQ plus community and leading local and national research projects focused on improving 2S LGBTQ plus people's experiences, navigating systems, and other social programming. Over the years, Andrew has presented, published, and instructed others on working with 2S LGBTQ plus peoples. Most importantly, they are the proud pappy of two beautiful cats. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Rebecca, to get us started this evening.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully this goes well. I'm not the most tech savvy person. Hopefully that all looks good to everyone. I'm going to start my timer here. So I have my presentation here as part of the Pride in Animal Welfare. So my presentation is coming from a veterinary practitioner's perspective. For those of you that attended the wellness conference, this is going to be pretty similar, aside from the fact that I don't have my partner in crime, Leo Perlinger, joining me tonight. But for those of you who weren't there, hopefully this provides some good insight. I like to just refer to this as story time with Rebecca, so I hope it fulfills that for everybody, and we'll get started. I did include in here a land acknowledgement as well. I know Josh kind of went through this, but I just sort of wanted to reiterate that, being a person that lives on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. The other thing I do want to acknowledge at this time is that I am telling my story from the perspective of a cis white woman, and I do understand the privilege that that has afforded me. I am going to share my story. I know that it differs from a lot of other stories, and I encourage you to hear those stories and sort of take mine from that perspective. But with that being said, I hope you do get something from the story that I'm going to share tonight. Josh kind of did the intro, but as you know, my name is Dr. Rebecca Mycock, and my pronouns are she, her. I do live in Saskatoon and work at City Park Veterinary Services here in the City Park community. I'm originally from the happening metropolis of Lanigan, Saskatchewan, where I lived until I finished high school, before moving to Regina for undergrad, and then Saskatoon to complete vet school. As mentioned, I also did spend a year in Hollywood, Florida, before settling back in Saskatoon here. And I've worked a variety of emergency jobs before settling in at City Park Vet, which is my current career home that I enjoy a lot. And a big thing that I have worked towards is creating an inclusive environment. And I have enjoyed a very inclusive working environment everywhere that I've worked. And for me, a big thing and a theme you'll see throughout this is how important visibility is for me and how important that was as a queer youth kind of growing up in Saskatchewan. I did just want to share a few fun facts about myself. These were harder to think of than you might think, but these are just a few things that I'll share about myself. I have a cheese-themed animal family. I have Ricotta, the golden retriever, who you may hear barking during this presentation, and then 2 orange cats named Cheddar and Gouda. I have a tattoo of a dancing pickle on my arm to match the one in my dog's ear. I'm a huge Harry Potter nerd, and while living in Florida, I actually got to go to Harry Potter World twice. Other fun things I did in Florida is I also got to go swimming with manatees, which was one of the coolest things I've done. And my very first Pride celebration was actually in Fort Lauderdale. All right, we'll get down to the nitty gritty. So the structure of my presentation, I'm going to start with my coming out story. So sort of how I navigated that growing up in small town Saskatchewan, and the importance of that and how that drives me wanting to be more inclusive and having that visibility in my life. Then the next part is what I call coming out part 2. Everyone thinks it's just this big experience where you come out once, but this is sort of an ongoing thing that you do throughout your life, and sort of how I navigate the fears associated with this. Then I'm going to go into sort of my views on creating an inclusive workspace and things that have been important to me, and that big piece of visibility. And then we'll cover some questions as we go. All right, so this is my coming out story. So as I mentioned, I was born to a farming family. We had a pig farm just outside Regina, and I did grow up mainly in Lanigan, Saskatchewan. I knew, from a pretty early age in elementary school that I was definitely different than, other people. But it wasn't really until I was much older and actually fully came out that I kind of realized the signs that I could have recognized earlier that, that I was maybe gay, things like having crushes on female teachers that you normalize for yourself as a kid. There were next to no queer people in the community that I grew up in. And the ones that I did know had not come out until long after moving away. So it didn't really provide me those role models in the community to look to. And I just never really identified with any of the openly gay people that I was seeing in pop culture in that limited sense that I was seeing. So in my mind, I didn't really think it was at all possible that I could be gay. So it was something that was very much just pushed to the back of my mind and just assumed I was different for some other reason. I did experience, as many kids do, some bullying throughout elementary school. And I kind of lived in this fear of anyone finding out anything else that was different about me that they could use to target me. So it was easier to sort of, not think about that at all. I was very much a tomboy growing up, and I spent a lot of time hanging out with the boys in town and playing sports that were, considered male dominated. I never felt directly questioned, but I'm sure there was, some things in the back of people's minds, but I never really had to truly confront that growing up. I did grow up in a fairly conservative family, and for sure in sort of the older generations, there was definitely, it wasn't an outright thing, but there was that air of homophobia and things that came up that would not have ever made me feel comfortable. I already did feel that I was, as I mentioned, I felt I was different from other kids. I definitely felt that I was different from my own family as well. And the thought of having something that was sort of going to further separate me from them and make me feel any more alone than I already did was terrifying. So it just made it easier to keep shoving that down and not thinking about it. I just maintained this goal of, I want to get out of Lanigan, move to a bigger community, sort of find myself. So after high school graduation, I moved to Regina for my undergrad, and then eventually came to Saskatoon to attend the Western College of Veterinary Medicine. I spent pretty much my entire university career still very much in the closet, hanging on to a lot of very complex feelings. And I exclusively dated men during this time, which then definitely makes it easier to sort of hide away. I get the questions like, why are you still single? Or, things like, are you just going to become a lesbian then? Which, I mean, spoiler alert, it happened, but it's not that simple. And I sort of always maintained that, I was really driven and focused on my education, and I was passionate about this, career. And so, people just are like, yep, that makes sense. That's what you're doing with your life right now. In my third year of veterinary school, I did come out to my sister, who was an amazing support system. But I was still not really comfortable enough to tell anyone else or to put any sort of labels on it. And for me, this was probably the hardest time, because I very much knew that I was gay, but I was still just terrified that anyone was going to find out. I spent, probably a lot of time crying, being really angry, and just thinking that I would probably just, be stuck hiding this forever, and no one else would ever really know. In the summer of 2017, I moved to North Battleford, and I lived with my good friend and now boss, Leo, and his husband, Pete. And this period of time was really pivotal for me, because it really was this push for me to start coming out. I just saw, how comfortable and open they were. And this was just such a breath of fresh air. They were my first close queer friends, and finding people that I related to in the community, and particularly in the veterinary community, just made me feel like, okay, if they can do this, then I definitely can as well. So I sort of started exploring things a little bit more in private. This was heading into my last year of veterinary school. And I sort of was able to come out to one of my best friends and start to feel kind of comfortable talking about how I was feeling. It was early 2018. I found out I was moving to Florida, and this was a huge push for me, because I knew I was going to be able to start fresh where no one knew me. I could completely be myself. I didn't have to explain anything to anyone, go through this whole process. So I started, coming out to my family and my friends sort of right before moving, and I was able to live my life kind of openly as lesbian when I settled into Florida. The final step in my coming out process, I did meet someone who was in sort of a similar position in their journey as me, and we did begin a long distance relationship at that time. And that was sort of the biggest push for me to come out publicly to everyone, because it just felt easier. I was, in this happy relationship, I could share that with people. And this was probably the first time that I felt, truly like completely happy and kind of comfortable in my own skin. I was living and working in an area where I got to interact with many queer people, and I just got to sort of experience life through this whole new lens of being completely myself and being completely open to everyone that I was meeting. After living in Florida for a year, I did move back to Saskatchewan. And while this was super exciting, I was also pretty terrified. I knew I was moving back to a more conservative city and province, and that I was going to have to really work to maintain that confidence that I built over the last year, and not go back to sort of hiding in spaces where I should be able to feel comfortable. So fast forward 4 years down the line, and I can't say, every day is easy and that every space feels completely safe for me or comfortable. But I definitely feel a lot more confident and able to put myself out there than I ever used to. I maintain this goal of, really trying to live my life as honestly and authentically as possible. I've been really fortunate to find an amazing community of friends here that allow me to feel that way and to grow in that sense. I was very fortunate that my family and friends made my coming out process very seamless. Even though I was absolutely terrified of, how people were going to react, and, spent many years coming to terms with things. That wasn't the case for anyone else. It was, very easy. And while most people who know me are aware that I'm not great about talking about my feelings, and this was definitely one of those moments, it was probably one of my most awkward experiences being able to tell people, but nobody made me feel that way. And I had mentioned this before, but I do recognize that not everyone has this experience. This is, sometimes can be rare to have such a seamless process of coming out. And I'm really grateful for that. And I do recognize the privilege that I have, that I didn't experience any, I guess, backlash, for lack of a better word, during this process. So now I'm going to get into what it looks like after you go through the big coming out process. You announce to the world, music plays, it's really magical. What it looks like just on a day-to-day basis, because, you know, I do still go through that. It's not as simple as just everybody knows now. So one of the things are, you know, what are the challenges of being open in my career path, and how do I sort of navigate this? One thing that definitely comes up, especially being someone who grew up in a more rural area, are what are the differences between sort of rural and urban practice? My primary experience in sort of rural practice was as a vet student, and I wasn't out. And at the time, I didn't think I would ever feel comfortable that way. But I watched, you know, my friend Leo navigate this, and it is a process, but he was very willing to be very open. But you do experience those things. You know, he would talk about going to calvings late at night, and, you know, the farmers asking like, how's your wife and the kids and things like that. So it's just those assumptions. And there's even differences, you know, I find with practicing here versus when I was in Florida. I mean, now we can all sit there and go like, how would you have ever felt comfortable in Florida? It was a very different environment for me when I lived there, and I did feel pretty comfortable at the time. But there is differences from where you practice, and you know, learning to just recognize, you know, those assumptions are going to come up, and how you navigate them is going to be the most difficult thing. There's always this question of like, is it appropriate to out myself? How do I go through this? And it is, you know, I'm in a unique career where, yes, my patient isn't a human, but I do have to really interact with people a lot. And we form these pretty close relationships with people. They're sharing a lot with you. And I do like to be able to balance sharing things with people and being transparent without, you know, oversharing. But it's, you know, how do you go through that? And one of the biggest challenges I had is I never really wanted my clients to know that much about me. And when I started this new job, a part of it was I was asked to write a bio about myself for our website, and I did it, you know, not thinking anything about it, shared very much about myself, thinking, you know, this is really great. And then it went up on the website, and I had this, you know, excuse language, but kind of an oh shit moment of, I have just outed myself to anyone who comes across our website, and how am I going to deal with that? But knowing that I've taken out, you know, the assumptions, and now I can just be comfortable with people, you know, they know the score before they come in, and, you know, that was the appropriate way to do it. You know, it takes away that fear that people are going to find out on their own, and it gives me that ability to be transparent. And it also gives people who are coming across the website, you know, I'm being open about things. It makes people a little bit more comfortable. And it, you know, it's that piece of never really assuming what someone's sexuality is. And by being transparent about it, you know, we can start to flip that script a little bit, and people can stop just immediately making those sort of heteronormative assumptions as well. I've sort of covered a little bit about this, but, you know, how do things change once you feel like you can live and work in a comfortable environment? It makes me better at my job, to be honest. I can sort of focus on what I'm doing and not think about, you know, am I being judged? Do people know? Are they going to find out without, you know, me being in charge of them finding out? That fear kind of disappears, and it does allow me to have a closer relationship with my clients, because I'm now being open about things, and I'm not hiding a part of myself and just, you know, nodding along when they say like, you know, how's your husband? And, you know, using the gender pronouns and things like that. And it, you know, guides that conversation a little bit better of being better about using, you know, terms like partner and noting people's pronouns, and not just going right down the path of assuming everyone is straight. And it just helps people to get better at that, as well as ourselves. So now I'm going to dive into a little bit of the things that I think have made workspaces really inclusive for me. I've been fortunate enough that everywhere I've worked, I have felt very comfortable since coming out, but that isn't always the case. And these are from the lens of things that we're doing in our practice that I think are beneficial, but, you know, this is just my point of view. And at the end of the day, I want to, you know, no, we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're doing really simple things, and I don't think we're shaking things up like crazy. You know, we also are a practice that does have two queer veterinarians, so it does, that makes a difference, but that doesn't mean that we're the only, practice that can be doing these things. So things I think are really important and that I've touched on a little bit are things like using appropriate pronouns. For me, it's things we can do, like you can just ask a client this when you're scheduling an appointment and note it. There's ways to have that in the appointment notes, or having whoever's, starting your appointment, stepping up and asking those things. And then just, making sure everyone who's involved is aware of the pronouns, being respectful of those things. I think we can sometimes be guilty of things like gendered terms, like using, you guys, etc. And we can avoid those things. And, when someone feels like their pronouns are being respected, you're being respectful of all aspects of things, that just makes people more comfortable and makes them more willing to walk through the door and keep coming back when they feel like those things are being noted. To a lot of people that are coming through the door, I am a stranger in the beginning. And if I'm taking that, extra step to make people feel comfortable, they're more willing to come back and feel safe in that space. Other things, appropriate signage and facilities to make sure everyone feels welcome and comfortable. Again, these are things that just people take note of, and they seem very simple, and they are, things like the all gender bathrooms, inclusive posters and advertisements that, make every person that walks through the door feel like they belong there. They can feel safe there. We want it to be a welcoming experience. I know on the outside, it's just, you're taking your pet to the vet. It doesn't need to be groundbreaking, but, people pick up on those things. And those are the things people, say back to me of why they kept coming there or why they chose this place specifically. And that resonates. Because it's important to me as a person working in that facility to feel that way. So it's going to be important to the person coming through the door with their pet. I've touched on this, but that piece of transparency, being open with all of our clients and coworkers. I'm never in a position where I feel like I'm hiding anything from anyone that I work with. We are a small and kind of tight-knit group, but this goes across the board to everywhere that I've worked about being just open. It just allows people to get to know you better, and it takes away the fear that you have of someone finding out, and it also allows people to just get to know you better and build those relationships. I kind of mentioned my own bio on the website. I took this little snippet from our website about Leo's bio. It's right there. You know about it before you even come to the clinic, and there's no secrets. We're both pretty open about who we are. And clients appreciate that. And it, like I said, these are things that, are actually said to me about why people enjoy coming there and the things that are important to them. The next thing is kind of that piece of educating and onboarding staff and colleagues. Again, we have a pretty small group, and most of us sort of knew each other in some capacity before we all started working together. So, we don't have a guidebook on how to be inclusive. It's just, we all sort of know each other and are comfortable with each other. But it is important that you're making sure everyone is on the same page, being respectful of each other's pronouns, being aware of each other's, sexuality and being respectful of that. And it makes for a happier work environment, but that also shows to the people who are coming through the door. I will say in the space that I work in, we all get along very well and have a great time. And that resonates with people. People notice that and are like, wow, everyone, seems to be very close and gets along, and they want to keep coming back through the door, like I've mentioned before. The last sort of thing is that piece of influencing by example. So these are practices that, can be across the board, right? This, like I mentioned, we do have two per vets in our practice, but that doesn't mean we're the only people who should be doing this. And that we're the only place that's sort of welcoming to members of the community. We don't need to become sort of the token queer clinic. There was a story not long after I started at the clinic in 2021 of someone saying that they could never apply at the clinic because they only hire gay vets. I would like to believe, deep down, I believe I was hired because of I'm a very good veterinarian and my relationship with Leo. That's not the case. And I mean, we have 3 veterinarians at the practice, and our other vet is a straight man. So, we're not trying to take over the world. This isn't, the gay agenda in action, where we're this specifically queer clinic. And we're the only place that other queer people can come and feel comfortable. These are simple things that we're doing. Like I said, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. Just because we slap a rainbow sticker on the door doesn't mean that's the only place that someone can feel safe. But again, simple things that we're doing here. So the last thing I wanted to touch on is that piece of visibility in veterinary medicine. Like I mentioned in my story, for me, not seeing any sort of queer role models or people I related to made it difficult for me to envision what my life looked like if I were to come out and having this happy and fulfilling life. So my big thing is trying to be as visible as possible and being honest about who I am and not hiding away so other people can see that. So one thing is that piece of sort of normalizing queerness in our profession. It is important for people who are questioning, can I be in that career and be open about who I am and be successful? So again, putting myself out there of being someone who's very happy in their career, happy being open, and that I can have this successful life. Again, not something I saw growing up, and is important for anyone who's questioning those things. The next thing is being that queer role model. For me, it's so important. That I can be that person. Not having that was really hard, and being able to be visible, in a professional setting, we look at it as, I'm being visible for kids, or adults who are really wanting to get into veterinary medicine, but it's also seeing that piece of, there's a kid who doesn't know if they can be both, and so allowing those people to see us in this position when they're questioning their sexuality and finding that person they can identify with. And for me, even if there's, one kid or adult who sees me and can relate to me, and that helps them in their process, that's huge to me. Because again, I didn't have that, and I want to be able to be that and help people along and find that happiness and that openness in that, when they're questioning where they're at. The other thing I think is providing a safe space for those kind of navigating their coming out journey. Things like for staff and coworkers, having resources available, things like pride clubs and groups. These weren't things that I had either growing up in small town through elementary school and high school. It wasn't even a thing when I was in veterinary school. It has changed now at the vet college here, that they do have these places for people to feel safe and connect with other members of the community. You can even be there to sort of provide a sounding board for somebody who's going through that process, and understanding that, the challenges associated with this is definitely harder for some than it is for others. Everyone goes through a different process. And even if you can just be a listening ear and understanding how difficult that process can be, it makes a huge difference to people. These pictures have nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I just think cute puppy pictures help with heavier topics. So that's everything that I have to cover. I think I did it in a good amount of time. I'm going to open it up to any questions anyone has. And I hope that you guys got something out of it. It wasn't just me rambling on, self-indulging in my story. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing your story. And yes, this is the opportunity for questions. Again, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to pop your questions into the Q&A box, and we can get those to Rebecca. And if you can't quite get the Q&A box to work and you're comfortable doing so, you can also just pop your questions in the chat as well. Again, hovering your mouse along the bottom of your screen, you will see the chat bubble. You can click on that. It'll open up the chat window, and you can pop things in there too. There is a question that has come in, and the question is, did you feel more confident in your practice when you became more confident in accepting and affirming your own identity in a public way?
Absolutely. I think for me, not having this constant feeling in the back of my mind that I didn't necessarily feel like I could be myself. It's hard to be confident in any other aspect of your life if you can't be fully confident in yourself. And when you're hiding a piece of yourself, you are in this constant sort of hypervigilance of, are people going to find out? What do I do? When am I going to tell people? How am I going to navigate this? I feel like, especially in the last probably couple of years of finding a home in a practice that I feel, is a group of my friends and almost feels like family, and that I've gotten a good group of clients that I feel I can be really, really comfortable and transparent with. It's just really allowed me to blossom. And I think I, feel like I'm the best version of the veterinarian I wanted to be. And I, am sort of emulating things that I look up to in a lot of other veterinarians, because I feel like I'm the most comfortable with myself that I have been, and can be the most open about sharing that part of my life.
Thank you. No other questions at this point, but are you able to stick around till the end?
Yes, absolutely, I can.
Okay. And as with that, another question did pop up, so we'll just time it appropriately, I guess. This question is, how do you navigate negative experiences with clients and homophobia if it's in a work setting? Are there policies regarding firing clients, in quotation marks, or other work tactics in place?
That's a great question. I will say I am fortunate enough that I haven't ever experienced any sort of negative interactions with clients because of it. Prior to starting at this clinic, I worked only in emergency practice. So I didn't really have a long enough time to sort of get to know my clients, and I didn't have repeat clients. So it generally, that wasn't a thing that came up. So I never really felt that was an issue. Now that I do have sort of repeat clients and kind of get to know people, I've never had that experience. My general opinion, and it is hard to feel this way because, it is easy to take things personally, but if someone has a problem with my sexuality and that seemingly is going to affect my ability to be a veterinarian, then I don't need that person as a client. They can move on. For me, it's really no different than any time I do have a negative interaction with a client that has nothing to do with me and my ability to be a veterinarian. We do not have any specific policies around that as a clinic. I think, in general, you have those specific policies about firing clients who are difficult. But I think because both Leo and I are very open, it's out there, there's no surprises, that we haven't really experienced anyone coming in who would necessarily have a problem with it. Or if they do, they haven't mentioned it and they've either stopped coming or they keep coming even though they're uncomfortable, which is, their choice as well. I think for me, it's that piece of, I'm taking the discomfort off of myself and I'm putting that on someone else. And if they're uncomfortable, they can sit in that and understand why they're uncomfortable. I can't continue to take that on. I did that for 26 years. I'm not willing to do that anymore. But yeah, it is a fair question. And I think that is something to ask if you're entering a job where you're unsure of, what the policies are, that there should be something there, should be something in place for firing a client. It's, like I said, it's to me no different than if a client is, being rude or difficult or, verbally abusive to staff for any other reason, falls under the same realm, that there has to be a way to sort of take care of that.
Thank you for that answer. Another question. I am an instructor at WCVM. Any words of wisdom that I can do to be more supportive to help students on their journeys?
I think for me, now that there are things like, I know it's now kind of merged into this WCVM diverse, but making yourself visible in things like those clubs to let other students know you're there as a supporter and as an ally. I think it's some of the things we talked about, even like taking the time to just learn people's pronouns, get to know them. Not everybody is going to want share their story. And I think that's an important thing. I'm very comfortable with people asking questions, me sharing my story. Obviously did it here to a group of mostly strangers, but not everyone is going to be comfortable in that way. And I think it's knowing that it's not necessarily, my job to educate people, although I do enjoy doing that. For some people, they don't. And, taking the time to look at things that are, important, attending things like these presentations to even see just the little things you can do that make people feel included and make people feel safe. Because to me, it seems like it is this difficult thing, but for me, it's really simple things that people have done that have made me feel that way. People learn about my life and, when I had a partner, those kinds of things, and took the time to get to know those things. And that is super important. It just makes you feel seen, and that they don't only want to know about it if you're in a, heterosexual relationship, they're willing to learn those things as well.
Another question is, you mentioned the WCVM Pride Club is new. What else do you hope for the vet med industry and animal welfare industry in the years to come?
I think what I hope in general is that and I think this is across the board, we reach a point where we don't have to continue having these moments of having to come out daily. I joke about a lot of it, but it does get tiring to have to go through that process of letting people know. And I think reaching a point where it is just normalized that we're not making assumptions about people's sexuality, or gender identities, anything like that. For me, that's really important. I am really proud to see what's going on in the schools with having these clubs and knowing that, it isn't just a space for, queer students to show up. Other people can show up, and it's a learning experience, and it's getting, to know people and learning those things of what you can do to be better and to create these inclusive workspaces across the board. I dream of that day where I'm not having to explain myself regularly, because it does happen almost daily. And I think that's not necessarily just in animal welfare and in the veterinary community, but across the board, that we'll just become comfortable with, this world where it doesn't matter who you love, doesn't matter what your gender identity is. And we just accept that. And we're not going to live in a world of assumptions and sort of continue this kind of heteronormative stereotypes across all things.
Rebecca, that has been some helpful insight. I was going to wrap things up, but there's another question, so we will keep on rolling. People are timing them properly. It's working out well. So this question is, do you think you might have come out earlier in your teens, perhaps if you had lived in an urban center?
I would like to believe that's true, but for me, I think I came out at exactly the right time for me. I was born in the 90s. I grew up in a time where, again, there wasn't a lot of, especially for me as a lesbian, I didn't feel like there was a lot of lesbian representation in media and any pop culture. So I don't know if it would have changed if I lived in a bigger center, but I think living in a small town is kind of like living in a fishbowl. Everybody knows you, everybody knows everything about you. So you're really under the microscope, and, maybe I could have hidden things and started to become a little bit more open in a bigger center where not everyone knew me. But I think for me, just in that period of time, it wouldn't have felt comfortable. And I needed, as hard as it was to grapple with that for so many years and not come out until I was, well into my 20s. For me, it was the right time, and it, came in a big transition in my life of finishing school and was really important to sort of go through that at that time. Do I wish I didn't go through like a lot of the difficult feelings associated with it? Absolutely. But everybody sort of has to go through that journey. And yeah, I don't think it would have changed. Although, in my mind, I think like, oh, maybe if I lived in a big city, I would have, been this happy queer teen, but I think I probably would have been in the same boat.
I think, everybody has their own journey, right? And I like what you said about coming out at a time that was right for you. I think that will hit a chord with many folks. This is not a question. They say it's a comment. They say we have the ABVMA Safe Spaces sticker on our front and back doors and have received several very positive comments. It makes me feel good that clients express their comfort. You, I think, shared a picture of a similar sticker. I'm assuming that was on the front door of your clinic. That has been accepted, and positive comments, hopefully all.
Yeah, absolutely. People definitely note that. I've even had, I think I've taken pictures of it at times, or it's been in the background of something I posted on social media, and I've had people ask me where they got it, that they want to have it for their clinic as well. And again, it's one of those little things that, I've specifically had clients comment on that, like, I really like that you have that, or I really liked what I saw, you were open in your bio on the website. That those are things people pick up on. And when they actually mention it to me, it's really important, because it's like, hey, I'm doing something right to make people feel safe and feel seen here. And it is a little thing. And again, it's that you got to still walk the walk of doing those things, but people do pick up on that. And I haven't had any negative reactions to it. It's all been very positive.
That's good to hear. Maybe this is naive, but I really do believe the majority of people are good, and that we won't hear a lot of the negative. I know it's out there. I mean, we saw some of it on the social media posts for this webinar, for example. So, I mean, it's important to acknowledge that it's out there, but I mean, we can, do what we can to make sure that folks do feel welcome and included in our activities. So
thank you so much for the invitation, Josh. Really excited to share with everyone learnings from myself, from friends, colleagues, communities that I've worked with. I'm looking forward to everyone's comments. So I do position myself both as a queer person who researches with queer people, and that's usually interwoven throughout when I present my talks. I would love to acknowledge that I'm joining from Treaty 6 territory and the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And with that, I also want to acknowledge that we just had Indigenous Peoples Day, and with my work, always centering intersectionality and Indigenous, trans Indigenous women and Two-Spirit peoples are at the highest risk of violence, and always centering those voices and perspectives throughout my work. I don't get to do this very often, but I really wanted to start with lovely photos of my babies, because not everyone cares. I have Luna, who's the gray one, who was a stray, so she has like frostbitten ears and a short tail, which is great. And then I have Voz, who's a Maine Coon, who has legs for days, and they're the greatest duo of life. Voz doesn't always make weird faces, but anytime I take a photo, he definitely does. So I wanted to start with one of my favorite quotes from Brandon Wint around queer. And so queer is a word I use contextually, depending on the population I work with. If I'm working with older populations, I tend to not use it because they were going through a time when it was most weaponized. It was very derogatory. But for the general population, when I'm working, I will use queer as a all-encompassing term. And with that, the definition goes not queer like gay, queer like escaping definition, queer like some sort of fluidity and limitlessness at once, queer like a freedom too strange to be conquered, queer like the fearlessness to imagine what love can look like and pursue it. And I like to position queer at the start as understanding that queer is this rejection of misogyny and trans misogyny to be who one is in their pursuits of loving and being who one truly is. And that when we have those conversations and conversations like these, it's really about us educating and unpacking things that have happened throughout history around allowing people to be who they are and love who they love. Rebecca highlighted this, which I really appreciated, which is, it's regarding queer people. We don't tend to grow up as ourselves. There is a lot of protective mechanisms that are happening in youthhood around being able to survive, being able to live with unharmed. The majority of youth homelessness come from queer youth. And Out Saskatoon has a wonderful program called Pride Home that supports youth in living and gaining long, secure housing. But it's really this understanding that when queer folks grow up, there's often this self-discovery that happens in that adulthood where they get to truly get to be themselves often. And it's a very beautiful yet painful journey. But also knowing the hope when I work with younger queer youth and even queer youth in their early 20s, they have very different experiences growing up that I'm like, I'm not that old. It's like, how can so much have changed in like 10 to 15 years around acceptance in schools, people coming out early, youth having terminology to describe who they are. And it's a really amazing change that's happening while there's continual harms going up. Ironically, because I researched healing, I also researched and hear about all the really terrible experiences that happen. And so while it is quite prevalent, especially things that are more subtle in nature, which we'll go on in later, there is positive change happening in the world and negative things as we're seeing in the news in the States and even here at home in Saskatchewan. So here's a lovely diagram from Out Saskatoon they created called the Identity Pal, which is a nice, helpful way of explaining and visualizing the different pieces when we think of our gender and sexuality. So there are the 4 pieces, and we're going to dive into each of these pieces. So we have sex, we have gender expression, and we have attraction or sexuality. So we're going to go through each of these one at a time, and then we're going to kind of contextualize them a little bit more. So when we think of sex, sex is composed of the characteristics used to assign female, intersex, or male at birth. Sex is extremely complicated and is actually quite diverse in itself when we look at all the different components that make up sex. So things like chromosomes, genitalia, homosomes, internal reproductive organs. And so there's in the research, there are movements around sex isn't a binary, where we're more, it's called a bimodal. So it's that we have 2 main kind of categories that are more naturalistically common, but there is so much variance that we can't actually assume that there is only a binary. And what's really important to know about sex is that it does not actually define a person's gender. And that gender is socially constructed depending on the socio-cultural, which is just the spaces that people grow up. When we look at gender across cultures, there are some cultures that have multiple genders. We see that in Indigenous people in Canada with Two-Spirit. We can see genders, some cultures have up to 7 genders. And also how gender is practiced changes based on what gender means in that culture. So when we look at gender, we have female, male, intersex, and kind of what is used to type those labels. Now, what's important here is that when we look at forms for our pets, in the context I'm speaking to today, the sex of the animal is really important. The sex of the owner is not. we're more likely wanting to use gender. So often best practice is when we use female, male, we're talking about sex. When we use man, woman, boy, girl, guys, gals, we're actually talking about gender. And that's kind of a nice way to separate and distinguish those ways of framing. So gender is an individual's internal sense of gender and internalization of masculine, feminine, and androgynous traits across various characteristics of the human experience. This is my gender. This is my definition of gender, which I'm very happy with, because a lot of definitions out there are like, gender is the identity that people claim, but that doesn't really help us understand what are the different pieces around gender. And so what I also like to point out is that masculine, feminine, and androgynous traits, everyone has a combination of all of these pieces, and how they kind of get portrayed and embodied in each individual is what that person's gender ends up being. One of the reasons why gender is really hard is because gender is really built around the notion of sex roles, which is what is individuals' roles in society, which we've really evolved over the past 40 to 50 years, where we're like, oh, those actual sex roles don't really influence what and how one should be able to grow up, pursue in life. When we look at gender, two words that may be new for folks, may be familiar, is transgender and cisgender. So transgender is a person whose gender is different from the gender they were assigned at birth. So when the baby comes out, doctors will look at various characteristics, usually it's reproductive, and then they assign a gender. Cisgender is a person whose gender is the same as the one that they're assigned at birth. So there is now growing practice. I have a colleague who's doing research around the experiences of, what is it called? Gender creative parenting, where gender isn't actually forced on youth. Youth do what they like to do and enjoy and develop, and then youth claim the gender that is who they are when that starts to become prevalent for them. Which is just really great parenting, to let any child play with the toys that they like to play with. So what's important here is when we look at some labels coming up around non-binary, things get a little messy in that not everyone who identifies as non-binary identifies as transgender. And so we can have, just because someone doesn't identify with a gender that they were assigned at, just because someone identifies with the gender they were assigned at birth doesn't mean that they're not non-binary. So if myself, for an example, I identify with the gender, my body that I was assigned at, but socially and how I interact and how I express myself and feel, I identify as non-binary, in that masculinity doesn't make any sense to me. And so really for me, it's this ability to be who I am, enjoy what I enjoy, and just how I show up in spaces is really influenced. So on that, we have two other terms, two-spirit and non-binary. So two-spirit is a term used by Indigenous people of Turtle Island. So an Indigenous person who holds unique gender roles within the Indigenous worldview of gender, which is separate from the Eurocentric gender binary of man and woman. So in contemporary understandings, two-spirit, this can include sexual/romantic orientations. It can include gender. It is very culturally bound in different communities, but also individually. And so it is an all-encompassing term. Traditionally, two-spirit people often held special roles in communities around leadership, healing. They were seen as having wisdom from the creator around understanding this other energy and dynamic. Non-binary is a person whose gender exists outside or between the gender binary. So it can be used solely to describe one person's gender, so I identify as non-binary, or it can be used as an umbrella term for all identities that exist outside of binary of woman and man. So things like gender queer, gender fluid, those could be ways of saying like different non-binary genders. And then we have gender expression. So gender expression is the way a person outwardly portrays themselves through clothing, makeup, hair, and body language. Expressions are often seen as gendered. However, the way a person expresses themselves may not tell you what gender they are. So one of the reasons I love myself is when I do these talks, I'm a very great application as a way of displaying this. So my gender orientation is being non-binary, but my gender expression is coded often as masculine because I have a beard. I tend to wear men's clothing because I really like pockets. But with understanding that the way that I view someone, I code someone, is not necessarily reflective of their gender identity. And this is really important around and highlights how important pronouns are in helping us understand what are ways of understanding how we can address others in the world, because visual cues are not always the case. Also knowing that just because someone's gender expression is androgynous doesn't actually mean that someone is non-binary. Gender expression and gender identity are separate things. And then we have sexual and romantic orientation. So a person's natural attraction to other people or to no one. So people become aware of their sexual/romantic orientations at different ages and stages of life. What's important is both gender identity, gender expression, and sexuality or sexual and romantic orientation are all fluid pieces. For some, it remains stable across their life. For others, it changes throughout their life. How people might express their gender can change. Who they're romantically or sexually attracted to can change throughout their life. And just knowing that these aren't stable kind of traits across time. So here are some lovely different definitions. I tried to provide some ones that are more prevalent that you're going to come across. So gay is someone who's attracted to people of the same gender. So this can be used to refer to men who are attracted and have or date other men. It can also be used globally also for women who are also dating other women. But there's also often more appropriate use is to use the word lesbian, which is a person who is exclusively attracted to women. We also have pansexual, which is someone who is attracted to people regardless of their gender, which is different than bisexual, a person who's attracted to two or more genders. So the way to understand the differences between these is bisexuality sees gender and is attracted to gender. Pansexuality is more about the person. There are attributes, characteristics that they are attracted to this person regardless of their gender. We also have demisexual, which is a person who experiences sexual attraction to people once they have a strong emotional relationship. My favorite about demisexual is that there are people who maybe had never thought of and always kind of thought of themselves as cis heterosexual, but demisexual is actually an identity that actually kind of goes over and into heterosexual, that, oh yeah, that might be a term that actually reflects how I feel and show up in my relationships. So also I always like to make sure there is asexual, which is a person who experiences little or no sexual attraction or desire to others. So there's a big spectrum when we look at asexuality, that can range from someone who is in a fulfilling romantic relationship. They have sex with their partner, but they may not really desire or really have any urges, but they really like doing it because they enjoy bringing pleasure to their partner, to a person who does not have sex and does not have any interest in it. It doesn't fulfill them. And so there is that range. It's important to know that asexual people date, they have relationships. Some asexual people have sex, they still can like physical touch, some don't. That's really personal preference, and really just understanding that it's more nuanced in understanding the individual's context of what does that mean for them. Straight or heterosexual is a person who's attracted to someone of a different gender than themselves. And then we have queer, which we've kind of gone over already, which is an umbrella term that refers to people who identify outside of the norm of straight, cisgender, or sexual and or gender identity. So these are the big pieces when we talk about sex and gender and sexual orientation around people's experiences of connecting with themselves and connecting with others. Especially when we come to gender and sexuality, these are self-claimed identities. And so just because a really good example is men who have sex with men. So just because someone has sex with a certain gender, that does not actually influence or indicate someone's sexual orientation in which they claim. And so there's a lot of research around men who have sex with men. The ways these are really important is if we're looking less in this context, but if I'm doing a promotion around sexual health awareness, I don't want to actually just target gay, bi, pan men, but also men who have sex with men. How we actually market it will actually be very dependent. And so knowing that, is it identity, is it gender, or is it behavioral? What are we actually trying to work with and support? The other piece that is that gender, sex, sexuality are only pieces around what it means to be and part of our human experience. And that intersectionality, when we look at the intersections of different identities, those can create different experiences. And so when we look at sex and gender, it's really important that we always highlight ethnicity, race, in that those intersections usually exacerbate humans' experiences in our social systems, in their daily life, and that really understanding that people who are from one community on this lovely flower and from another will have different experiences. And when those intersect, those create a whole different type of experience. And so things for us to keep in mind when we're framing this, that it's actually one piece of people's identity, and all these other pieces are going to influence and create different experiences in the world. The other piece is the wheel of power and privilege. So knowing that also with those different identity pieces come with different social power. And often our systems marginalize people on different ways, often in ways that support misogyny and white supremacy. So a lot of my work, I didn't think when I was starting out that that was going to actually be at the center around a lot of our work. And so also thinking about power imbalances in the way that we're working up. And this goes to who we listen to in the room, who, when we're working and we're hearing stories, who we believe, and some of our implicit biases that really shape how we interact, perceive, and make assumptions about others. And so next, I wanted to go into some things that you can do to help support your own allyship, your own growth in creating welcoming spaces for others. And the first one relates to what I like to call thinking queerly. So it's like clearly, it's a pun. So the first way is disrupting cis heteronormativity, which means when I meet someone, do I assume cisness, meaning that their gender is assigned, that if I meet a man, they were born a boy, they're a young boy, they're a man, and that has stayed consistent, and that they're going to marry a woman? That am I meeting those assumptions when I'm meeting people, and disrupting those and challenging, right? Challenging assumptions around what does gay look like, or what is the trans experience, disrupting just that thinking. I always like to engage people with curiosity, knowing that sex and gender is just one piece, but I'm like, oh, who are you? Who is this person I'm meeting? And not kind of preloading who they are based on my interpretation of them. Embodying that queer is normal, queer is prevalent across, well, not queer because queer is sociocultural, but sexuality and different ways of sex we see are practiced throughout the animal kingdom, and knowing that it is actually very normal. The part that is not normal is hating on queer folks through homophobia and transphobia that is very much geared only to humans. Challenging assumptions around, most people might have some gay people in their life, that's not representative of what all gay people are like. If I meet someone who's a trans individual, I don't know, because I know other people are trans, what their experiences are like, and I don't want to make assumptions. And that's something that's really important, that not all queer people like RuPaul's Drag Race. Those people are wrong, but not everyone does. I love it, but it's understanding that queer people are all very nuanced humans. I also always encourage people to consume some queer media, consume intersectional media from different authors, shows, and just expanding world's views, especially when it might not be prevalent in the current kind of spaces that you work. And then practicing cultural humility. So cultural humility is a shift around service providers away from cultural competence, because we cannot truly be competent on someone else's culture, but we can take a self-first approach to really understanding these differences. And it takes into consideration learning about one's own biases and being a growth mindset and curiosity and learning of other cultures. And so knowing that, yeah, this is how my culture operates, but that's not necessarily what's in everyone's also. And it's learning and being humble. So moving a little bit more outwardly just from ourselves, we can practice some allyship. Rebecca did some great examples of this around displaying symbols of safety and support. So things like pronouns in your email, posters, magazines and waiting rooms. Queer folks, I don't think I've heard of a queer person who hasn't experienced some rejection in their life. It can be often more prevalent, and there can be a lot of fear around it, around just being othered, being rejected. And so people can, in new spaces, especially depending where they are in their journey of expression, of acceptance of themselves, can feel unsafe. And so symbols of safety and support are really huge. That people will, you're like, will anyone notice this one rainbow magnet that we have right there at our front desk? People will notice it. And it is a signal of safety for them. It is a signal that, okay, yeah, this might be okay. Allyship can also be practicing and normalizing pronouns, introducing yourself. So anytime I'm usually meeting with someone or meeting with a new client, I do health and wellness coaching. I'll always, it's on our intake forms, but I also always introduce myself and my pronouns, and then let other people introduce their own. Changing normative language is really huge. So an example would be, maybe someone's like in the clinic and they're like, oh, my partner will come and pick them up. And this was a woman, and then the person with this is like, oh, what's your husband's number? I don't have that on file. So it's this assumption, right, around that. So changing normative language around, oh, like, what is your partner? His phone number, so we can have that on our file. Even we can do that around assuming genders in relation to children, maybe when we're working with pregnant people, depending on who they are, they may not know, they may not believe in predetermining gender before children are able to identify it. And so being more inclusive and open with our gender, and this goes from even saying like, oh, I'm dating someone. And it's like, oh, what is your boyfriend or girlfriend's name? That actually is still gendered and actually erases gender queer and gender non-binary people. And so just being more intentional and open with our language as we're learning and exploring and meeting new people. Challenging microaggressions. So even things, I was thinking about this in, I think I hear this sometimes more, not in the community of vets, but with some friends and animals around sometimes even jokes or nods around gender or trans, like, well, maybe my cat does identify as non-binary. Gender is socially constructed, and it actually minimizes actual queer people's experiences. And then the last one is trauma-informed care. It's a good practice for anyone working with humans around understanding that people come with different traumas that can influence. So things like queer folks, when I think of this, animals are really important to queer populations. They're really, they can often be family for folks who don't have family. They can be extremely powerful. And so also knowing that when things are happening in that person's animal's care, that can be an extremely stressful experience for them because of past things that have gone on around loss. And so a technique, consent, procedural counseling, just talking people through the things that'll happen and helping have all those pieces lets people know that things will be okay. And then the last one is facilitating change, which is providing education to your organization. So we're looking a little bit bigger on your team, making sure everyone has basic understanding of these pieces, looking and auditing policies for exclusion and barriers, both in a way to reduce barriers around parental care, right? Making sure there's no genderedness of man and woman, because that can influence what people's rights are, but also it includes signals of inclusion. When it says parental leave for adoption for this, all of those pieces really signal safety. So even harassment, like that harassment includes gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. That all those pieces really help with creating safety in your organization. Degender washrooms. So if it's a single stall bathroom, it can be a washroom. We don't need to put little human hieroglyphics on it. It's another way of just signaling safety. I've gone to conferences where in large stall washrooms, we all use the same bathroom. The world did not implode. It was great. The people who were most happy were women because there was more prevalent people at the conference. And so the bathroom opportunities just expanded. There was lower lines. It was a great experience. That's too progressive for Saskatchewan. I've seen it in Vancouver, but like that level, we're not ready yet here in Saskatchewan. Knowing family is family. So a lot of queer folks to this day continually experience rejection and ostracization from family. And so knowing that sometimes chosen family is family. And that also, when we think of people even in the workplace who need to leave or to like go for medical emergency, and it's like, oh, are they your family? It's like, well, no, but they are. And so really understanding that even in our policies, that people get to determine who is family, not us on the outside. And then participate in pride, but actually participate in pride, not just to showcase, but to participate in community, to celebrate diversity, to celebrate strength and resiliency in the pursuits of being oneself and love, and to liberate selves from preconceived notions of what it means and who we can be in the world. And that is all. That is my last one.
Thank you, Andrew. That was very enlightening. I know I certainly took a lot away from it, and makes me want to continue learning, because as somebody who I thought was fairly well informed, I learned there's more room for growth, which is not a bad thing. So thank you for sharing that with me. All of us.
Even me, they'll be like a new term. Like, what's this term? Like, I researched like, what's this new thing? And I'm still always learning.
Yeah, see, we can never stop learning. We do have a question, a couple of questions coming in now. Someone is asking, what can meaningful participation in Pride look like this month and or all year long?
Ooh, that's meaningful participation, I think means, this is a very good question. I'm also someone who likes to get into the nuances of things too. But when I just think of, there's a thing of like even gay bars in Saskatchewan with being overrun by straight people because it's such a safe, accepting place, then where do queer people go? And so I think it means meaningful participation means going up, supporting, going to events, but not taking up space in such a way that the center is like off of queer people. And I feel this way even with like Pride came from trans, BIPOC people, and always centering those voices and those experiences and making sure there's those spaces is like really important. So going out, supporting, but don't throw your bachelorette, and like kind of really take the focus off of people who's kind of coming out.
I like that. That's a good approach. Just a comment saying thank you. Very informative and very thorough. And then someone is asking, does agender mean the same as non-binary?
Okay. No. Non-binary is really common. So agender, this is a really good question. Agender would be like, I don't claim gender, right? I don't have a gender and I don't prescribe that. Whereas non-binary, like identify having gender, like there are attributes of masculinity and femininity and man and woman that I embody. And so for some people it means I'm on the spectrum of man, woman being non-binary, and I'm kind of in the middle. Sometimes it means I'm outside of my own gender, whereas agender means like I really don't ascribe to gender.
Oh, hopefully that will answer the question for folks. We do have a couple more minutes left. I think Rebecca is still here. Rebecca, can we have you join us again? I think we can open the floor up to questions for both presenters. So please feel free to pop your questions again in the chat if you're comfortable doing that. Again, that's more of a public forum. And then of course you can also pop your questions in the Q&A box as well. And we can have those questions or present those questions to our presenters. Lots of presenting tonight. And as we kind of wind down, maybe I will just open it up for you folks to kind of share some final thoughts. Rebecca, we can start with you if that's okay.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for you guys for asking me to do this presentation. For anyone that knows me, public speaking is absolutely not my favorite thing in the world. So I appreciate being asked, and it was good to go through this presentation again, kind of for a second time, especially doing it by myself. And thanks for everybody who came out to attend, people I know, people I don't know. I hope that everybody got a little bit of something out of my presentation and it was informative. And you know, I'm pretty available around Saskatoon for those of you that live here. If you have any follow-up that you don't want to do within this group setting, I think these conversations are really important, and it's good to, I know I've said it a million times, but create that visibility you know, in this community of Saskatchewan, in the veterinary community, animal welfare community, all of those spaces, it's really important to me.
Thank you, Rebecca. Andrew?
I have a really random, this is going to seem really random but it's something that I've had to encounter quite a bit. It's a term very old. It's called chicken hawking, which is a term relating to the ideologies and stereotypes of older gay men preying on younger gay men through pedophilia. And so it's a really old stereotype and trope, but there is no data that ever supports, and there is no gay men are slightly less likely than heterosexual men to actually practice pedophilia or assert pedophilia. And so that's a really important when we think of just stereotypes around things. It's really unpacking things that we learned. Like in the 1980s, they had like ads on like, do you know where your kids are? And it was like anti-gay. And it's ridiculous when we think of that. That's not that long ago. But knowing that there are things that we have to unpack as we've changed and evolved. And that's just part of the process too, is just like, oh, maybe that's not supportive. Maybe that's not true, in challenging those pieces.
Very good advice for sure. Well, we have had no other questions come in, so I think we can begin the process of closing down for the evening. I do have a couple of notes before we say good night. We will be hosting another webinar this coming Thursday, June 29th at 7 p.m. The webinar is called Indigenous History in Animal Welfare, Why It Matters. We'll be joined by Elder Betty McKenna, who will discuss the role animals have played in Indigenous history and culture. And we'll also hear from Megan Schultz from Canine Action Project. Megan will discuss their work with Indigenous communities in Saskatchewan. And you can register for that webinar by visiting our website at SaskSPCA.ca. Hopefully we'll see some of you folks there on Thursday evening as well. Once again, Rebecca, Andrew, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. And I wish you a good evening and enjoy this wonderful summer weather we're having.